Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents The First Fossil Hunters, Dinosaurs, Mammoths, and Myth in Greek and Roman Times, by Adrienne Mayor, narrated by Donna Postel. Publisher's Note: this audiobook includes references to illustrations and appendices present in the print and ebook formats of this book. Introduction to the 2011 edition. Dinosaurs, Mammoths, and Myth in the Greek and Roman World, tracing the history of human curiosity about fossils. This book was researched and written in the late 20th century, based on a radical idea that the prehistoric fossil record and Greek and Roman mythology were somehow related. When The First Fossil Hunters was first published, in 2000, geomythology, the science of recovering ancient folk traditions about complex natural processes or extraordinary events, was an emerging discipline that ancient people observed, collected, measured, and displayed the fossils of immense extinct species, and that they had, moreover, recognized them as the traces of remarkable creatures that had flourished and then perished in a distant era, were alien concepts. Scholars had generally regarded ancient Greek and Latin descriptions of the bones of giants and monsters as nothing more than tall tales or superstition. Classicists were unaware that the fossils of dinosaurs, mastodons, mammoths, and other extinct animals were conspicuous features of the natural landscape in antiquity. Scientists, for their part, did not realize that fossils were part of the Greek and Roman cultural landscape. As the first comprehensive study of ancient observations and interpretations of fossils, from huge dinosaurs to tiny shells, this book documents a vast and long-neglected body of literary and archaeological evidence, from Homer to St. Augustine, to show how fossils captured the attention of Greeks, Romans, and their neighbors. Myths, legends, and historical accounts reveal how ordinary folks struggled to understand puzzling petrified remains of unfamiliar creatures buried in their own backyards. Pre-scientific fossil descriptions, often expressed in mythical language, contain perceptive insights about the deep past. Those ancient understandings were lost during the Middle Ages and only rediscovered in modern times. In the decade after the original publication of The First Fossil Hunters, the evidence for fossil encounters in antiquity has been embraced by classical scholars, ancient historians, archaeologists, art historians, philosophers, geologists, paleontologists, geomythologists, and historians of science. Today, this book serves as a text for college courses in both classical mythology and the earth sciences, and its results are used in educational programs in art, archaeology, myth, biology, anthropology, paleontology, and natural history. The First Fossil Hunters has even inspired some novelists. Examples include H.N. Turteltaub, The Griffins' Skull, a seafaring novel of the ancient Greeks, and Jack DeBrule's Havoc. American and European television shows about dragons, monsters, giants, and other mythic creatures have featured some of the fossil stories gathered here. One popular example is Ancient Monster Hunters, the History Channel documentary about my research, filmed at the American Museum of Natural History in 2004. Each time this and similar shows appear on TV, every time a museum exhibition presents fossil legends, and after each illustrated lecture or interview, I receive letters, emails, and artwork from another generation of children, students, scientists, academics, and independent scholars excited by the links between fossils and fabulous creatures. Many standard reference books on paleontology and dinosaurs now include my theory, presented in Chapter 1, that the griffin of Greek myth arose from nomads' observations of well-preserved dinosaur remains in Central Asia. A children's book, forthcoming from National Geographic, explains how my detective work revealed dinosaur skeletons lurking at the heart of ancient tales of fierce griffins guarding gold. Interdisciplinary studies and geomythological investigations are now moving to the forefront of science. For the first time, encyclopedias of mythology, ancient history, and geology include entries for fossils and geomythology. An important international collection of geomythology papers, Myth and Geology, was published in 2007. Other path-breaking geomythological publications include Elizabeth and Paul Barber, When They Severed Earth from Sky, How the Human Mind Shapes Myth, Princeton University Press, 2004, which explores how myths encode geological events and evidence, and seismologist Amos Noor's Apocalypse, Princeton University Press, 2008, which integrates archaeological and legendary evidence for earthquakes. Cindy Clendennin's Hydromythology and the Ancient Greek World, Fineline, 2009, analyzes Greek myths in terms of karst geology. Fossil folklorist Christopher Duffin combines geology, medicine, and popular lore in articles on the history of medical uses of invertebrate fossils. In The Star-Crossed Stone, University of Chicago Press, 2010, paleontologist Kenneth McNamara surveys the cultural history of sea urchin fossils from Neolithic times to the present. The research for this book, much of it undertaken in the quaint era antedating email and lightning-fast electronic searches of texts and images, was daunting. Collecting the widely scattered, long-forgotten, ancient literary and archaeological evidence, and then comparing it with obscure paleontological reports, was an arduous labor of love. I spent nearly 2 decades combing through unindexed Greek and Latin literature for accounts related to fossils, corresponding, by snail mail, with international scholars and scientists, and traveling to natural history collections and archaeological museums. I devoted gloriously happy hours in dimly lit library stacks to searching out books and journals about 19th and 20th century archaeological and paleontological fieldwork. I'm still amazed by the generosity of so many specialists in so many diverse disciplines who seemed delighted to share their knowledge with an obsessed outsider on a strange mission. My incessant pestering of classicists, geologists, and other specialists turned out to have an unanticipated good result. This quest helped to introduce many scholars from the humanities and sciences to one another for the first time. Today, people of all ages, interests, and educational levels attend my presentations about ancient fossil discoveries. University seminars and public lectures about fossil-related legends are sponsored by unheard-of coalitions of departments of classics, biology, art, geology, archaeology, and philosophy, whose members rarely interact otherwise. The first fossil hunters, I'm proud to say, has crossed many seemingly insurmountable disciplinary borders. This book's development was sometimes frustrating, but mostly exhilarating. The sensation of losing track of time and place while submerged in libraries and museums often put me in mind of Jacques Cousteau's phrase, l'ivresse de grande profondeur, rapture of the deep, to describe the giddy intoxication experienced by divers exploring hitherto inaccessible undersea realms. Frequent serendipity, occasional eureka moments, and small triumphs were rewards that kept me going. One day, in Princeton's Firestone Library, I drew 2 maps of the Aegean world on transparent tracing paper. On one map, red X's marked the spots where people had reported the bones of giants or monsters in antiquity. On the other map, I circled the rich deposits of mastodon, mammoth, and other large vertebrate fossils known to modern paleontologists. Fingers crossed, I superimposed the 2 sketch maps. The X's and O's matched. Maps 3.1, 3.2, and 3.3 show the results. Another dramatic moment came after months of searching in vain for what proved to be the fossil femur of an Ice Age woolly rhino, treasured by ancient Greeks and unearthed nearly 2 millennia later by archaeologists in the 1970s. Once stored on the ancient Acropolis at Nicoria, southern Greece, perhaps revered as the thigh bone of a mythic giant, this fossil was presumed lost when I began writing The First Fossil Hunters. After a long, involved correspondence, to everyone's surprise, the precious relic, a rare example of a large animal fossil collected in antiquity and recovered by modern archaeologists, finally turned up in a cellar in Duluth, Minnesota, where it had gathered dust for more than 20 years. The story of this historic bone is told in Chapter 4. From its origins in the Peloponnese, the ancient fossil has traveled from the Mediterranean, across the Atlantic, to northern Minnesota, then east to New Jersey and New York City, west again to Bozeman, Montana, and Palo Alto, California. Now, 10 years after the original publication of The First Fossil Hunters, I'm delighted to say that the peripatetic Nicoria bone is en route to a permanent home in the Ashmolean Museum, Oxford University, where it will be displayed in the Greece Gallery. Since 2000, natural history museums have begun to refer to mythic creatures in fossil displays and to produce popular exhibits drawing on the concepts first presented in this book. In 2006, for example, the Tylers Museum, Netherlands, invited me to deliver the keynote address for a popular exhibit directly inspired by The First Fossil Hunters, Fossils and Folklore, Dinosaurs and Dragons. The next year, 2007, I served as a consultant for the American Museum of Natural History's blockbuster exhibit, Mythic Creatures, which also draws on some of my research. One display compares the griffin of Greek myth to a Protoceratops skull from Central Asia. Another case explains how ancient sailors might have mistaken a fossil mammoth skull for a one-eyed cyclops. The Mythic Creatures show travels to natural history museums in Chicago, Boston, Toronto, Sydney, Atlanta, and other cities around the world through 2017. The London Museum of Natural History maintains an online compendium of folk beliefs associated with invertebrate and vertebrate fossils. In 2010, the museum put together a traveling exhibit, Myths and Monsters, with animatronic and other dramatic displays of legendary creatures, expanding on an earlier show, Fascinating Fossil Folklore, which opened at the Walter Rothschild Zoological Museum in 2007. In 2008, the Brabant Natuurmuseum invited me to contribute examples of fossil myths for children's educational programs, similar to online fossil legend and geomythology seminars I've designed for young students. In a show called Dragons Unearthed, 2008, the largest children's museum in the United States, Indianapolis, unveiled a spiky dinosaur skull, dubbed Dracorex hogwartsia, alongside displays of fossil-related creatures from mythology. Meanwhile, books on the science underlying Harry Potter's magic explain how fossils influenced ancient ideas about griffins and giants. The idea that impressive fossils played a role in how people of the past imagined monsters and giants has been influential on several surprising fronts. People now realize that in fossiliferous lands, the bizarre bones of extinct creatures could help to explain dragon imagery. This idea was taken up by the Lyric Opera of Chicago for the portrayal of the terrible dragon Fafnir in Wagner's opera Siegfried. For the first time in opera history, Fafnir appeared on stage in 2004-2005 as a gigantic, terrifying skeleton of a prehistoric reptile. 16 black-clad acrobats manipulated the monster's long, bony vertebrae and massive skull. Chicago opera-goers could compare this revolutionary Fafnir dragon with the magnificent T-Rex dinosaur unveiled in Chicago's Field Museum in 2000, and with archaic bronze griffins from Greece displayed at the Art Institute of Chicago. Many other exciting new discoveries, Theories, events, displays, and publications are increasing our knowledge of fossil encounters in pre-Darwinian cultures. The following describes some striking new developments since 2000, which elaborate and update the material presented in chapters 1 through 6. Chapter 1 begins with my visits to a tiny fossil storeroom above a village post office and to the modest archaeological collection on the island of Samos. Today, the impressive fossils of Samos are displayed in the new Aegean Natural History Museum in Mytilene, and the bronze griffins and other artifacts are housed in the spectacular Archaeological Museum in Samos Harbor. In 2005, paleontologist Nikos Solunias, a native of Samos, and I co-authored a scientific analysis of the ancient insights about the colossal fossils of Samos. Chapter 1 also recounts the thrilling day in Cornell University Library when I turned a page in Roy Chapman Andrews' 1926 memoir of his Gobi expedition and found myself staring at a familiar face, the unmistakable profile of a mythical griffin replicated in the skull of a beaked dinosaur, figures 110 and 111. The artist's conception of how a griffin could be reconstructed from the skeleton of a Protoceratops dinosaur, figure 113, is one of the most requested illustrations from this book. It was created by Ed Heck, who was then a paleontological artist at the American Museum of Natural History. In 2010, Daniel Loxton produced a fleshed-out, colored version to illustrate the secret of the griffin for Junior Skeptic magazine. We can now expand the geographical distribution of dinosaur fossils to lands closer to the Mediterranean Sea, shortening the distance that oral tales of fierce griffins had to travel to reach Greece in antiquity. Even more exciting, Smithsonian paleontologist Hans-Dieter Seuss and his team recently discovered a new species of dinosaur with 3 horns along the old caravan trails in Uzbekistan. The Protoceratops and Psittacosaur dinosaurs of the Gobi Desert and Jungar and Turfan basins of China, whose fossils I suggest influenced the image of the griffin, lack horns. This new discovery of 3-horned beaked dinosaur fossils in the western Kizilkum Desert might help to account for the 3 protuberances on the heads of many griffins in ancient art. Since the section on Chinese lore linking fossils and dragons was written, Dong Jiming and other Chinese paleontologists have enlisted the help of peasants familiar with the locations of dragon bones traditionally used for medicine. The farmers now understand the scientific significance of the fossil deposits and have helped paleontologists discover new species of dinosaurs. Not all myths of monsters or giants are fossil-related, of course. Such tales exist in many lands that lack large vertebrate fossil remains, or whose fossils are inconspicuous to untrained eyes. For example, pterosaur fossils exist in Mexico, but are not noticeable to ordinary passers-by, so legends of giant raptors there cannot be associated with flying reptile remains. Scandinavia has many tales of dragons and sea monsters, but has been considered barren of large fossils. In actuality, however, the huge tusks and fossil bones of Pleistocene mammoths exist in southern Sweden and Norway. Moreover, massive skeletons of marine reptiles, including a 50-foot-long Jurassic pliosaur, have recently been discovered in Norway by Jørn Hurum, University of Oslo Natural History Museum. Did early Scandinavian mythographers know of similar monstrous remains? Further research might reveal interesting answers. The body of evidence gathered in the first fossil hunters led the late Canadian paleontologist William A.S. Sargent to change his opinion, published in several dinosaur encyclopedias, that large vertebrate fossil bones were too big to be noticed by people in antiquity. Sargent and I became friends, and in 2001, we co-authored an article on the folklore of fossil footprints for Ichnos, the Journal of Trace Fossils. Our article, in turn, inspired Andrea Bauken, paleontologist at UNESCO's Narrator Geopark, Portugal, to re-evaluate the identity of the footprints in stone in Italy, believed in antiquity to be the tracks of the Greek hero Heracles and the giant cattle of Geryon, described in Chapter 2. Balkan also discovered evidence that Leonardo da Vinci was the first to understand trace fossils, pushing the science of ichnology back several centuries. Balkan and I have co-authored a chapter about trace fossil folklore around the world. Paleontologist Evangelia Tsoukala, Aristotle University, Thessaloniki, Greece, who supplied so much valuable information and photographs of mastodon fossils in Chapter 2, helped to found the new Mammoth Museum and Dinosaur Park in Thessaloniki. Currently, she is establishing 2 fossil museums for the northern Greek towns of Milia and Siatista. In 2009, Tsoukala achieved the Guinness World Record for the longest mastodon tusks ever found, over 16 feet long. This pair of tusks surpasses Tsoukala's 1998 record, the 14-foot tusks discussed in Chapter 2 and shown in Figure 225. Tsoukala also served as a consultant for the BBC television show Greek Myths, True Stories. The documentary was based on Robin Lane Fox's Traveling Heroes in the Epic Age of Homer, Knopf, 2009, which drew on material in this book. Lane Fox has pointed out more examples of fossil discoveries in antiquity. For example, in the plain of Unki in northern Syria, Alexander's successor, Seleucus, unearthed the skeletons of 2 giants killed by the gods. Ana Pinto, the young archaeologist-paleontologist pictured in Figure 27, who contributed photographs and information about Pleistocene elephant fossils in Spain, made an astonishing discovery in 2002. Pinto received the 2005 Wings World Quest Women of Discovery Award and media attention for her exploration of remote caves in northern Spain. In a cave inhabited for 60,000 years by early hominids, Pinto found evidence that dramatically changed our understanding of the interactions between Neanderthals and cave bears, mammoths, rhinoceroses, lions, and other extinct megafauna. Native American ideas about prehistoric remains, mentioned briefly in Chapter 2, became the subject of my book surveying pre-scientific discoveries and interpretations of dinosaur and other fossils in the New World, Fossil Legends of the First Americans, Princeton University Press, 2005. 2 images in Chapter 3 were especially fun to create. A friend had presented me with a toy model of a mammoth as a joke. Instead of gluing the plastic skeleton together in proper pachyderm form, I scattered the plastic bones, as they might have been revealed by an earthquake, flood, or plow in the time of Homer. Then, I tried to imagine how people lacking paleontological knowledge might have visualized the articulation of these enormous bones, many of which resembled huge counterparts of their own limbs. I arranged the little plastic mammoth bones to resemble a humanoid giant. For human scale, I found a plastic Day of the Dead keychain, a jaunty little skeleton man with rhinestone eyes. Barely able to contain my glee, I photographed the pair against black velvet. The effect was crude, but surprisingly effective. That image was recreated in a video for the American Museum of Natural History's highly acclaimed Mythic Creatures exhibit, which also features an interactive puzzle to allow children to build a giant by rearranging mammoth bones. Widely disseminated in international media, my image of the bipedal mammoth ogre and his little human friend, Figures 3.4 and 3.5, has been reproduced in scholarly studies, scientific journals, popular books and magazines, classroom and museum materials, and internet discussions and blogs. The image is accompanied by learned discussion in The Archaeology of Nostalgia, Thames and Hudson, 2002, by John Boardman, a leading authority on classical art and archaeology, and one of the lucky few to possess a limited edition First Fossil Hunters t-shirt emblazoned with the iconic pair of skeletons. When I wrote the section in Chapter 3 on ancient beliefs about heroes' bones as recorded by Philostratus, I relied on Geoffrey Ruston's unpublished translation of On Heroes. Now interested readers can read Ruston's own scholarly discussion of the fossil bone finds attested in this ancient work. We can also answer the question of whether large prehistoric elephant species once roamed Crete. When I wrote Chapter 3, only dwarf proboscidean fossils were known on Crete. But as I noted, numerous detailed ancient reports of gigantic bones that came to light on Crete strongly suggested that very large mastodon fossils ought to exist there. My prediction was confirmed in 2003, when Greek paleontologist Charalampos Fasoulas of Crete's Natural History Museum announced the discovery of fossil tusks and bones of the colossal mastodon Dinotherium giganteum, one of the largest mammals ever to walk the earth. Another open question in Chapter 3 has stimulated further investigation. I suggested that the dragon folklore of northern India might have been influenced by observations of oversized extraordinary bones in the fossil beds of the Siwalik Hills below the Himalayas. In 2008, a folklorist and 2 paleontologists demonstrated the role of Siwalik fossil deposits in myths from the Mahabharata, India's famous epic. As of this writing, I have heard from paleontologists who are aware of traditional tales and beliefs associated with dinosaur and other large vertebrate fossils in Egypt, Yemen, Africa, Cambodia, China, Japan, Australia, and South America. More definitive studies of these intriguing fossil legends are eagerly awaited. Some readers have assumed that the monster of Troy, depicted on the ancient Greek vase, figures 4.1 and 4.2, was the starting point for my research. In fact, it was the very last piece of artistic evidence to be included. By the time I was halfway done with the book, I had gazed at that monster's bizarre head many times without comprehending what I was looking at. As Chapter 4, on artistic evidence, neared completion, I decided to take one more look at this vase. Suddenly, the identity of the weird creature snapped into focus. After years of poring over the fossilized skulls of extinct Mediterranean megafauna, my eye finally saw the monster's features for what they were. My new search image, see Chapter 1, suggested that the ancient artist had modeled the monster of Troy on the extraordinary sight of a large, strange skull weathering out of a cliffside. Like the best scary monsters, this imaginary beast is a hybrid, grafting realistic features from large mammals, birds, sharks, crocodiles, serpents, and other reptiles onto the skull of an extinct giraffe, a common but striking fossil in the Aegean. It was a great honor when the curators at the Boston Museum of Fine Arts thanked me for solving the mystery of their celebrated artifact and invited me to present my findings. On that visit, we noticed yet another layer in the composite nature of this famous monster. What we had taken to be a scratch on the vase, across the monster's brow, turns out to be a deliberately painted antenna, like that of a grasshopper or beetle. We can now add insects to the long list of species contributing features to the monster of Troy. Like the lolling tongue, quivering antennae helped to bring the fossil monster to life. Are there any other artistic depictions of monsters that could be related to ancient observations of baffling fossils, besides the ones mentioned in Chapters 1 and 4? Perhaps. I maintain a file of numerous unidentified creatures in ancient art, gathered from around the world. I invite readers to share with each other and me their own readings of such images. Meanwhile, now that archaeologists are aware that fossils were deliberately collected in antiquity, the evidence for dedications of fossils in temples and graves is steadily accumulating. Chapter 4 describes thousands of heavy, polished black fossil bones wrapped in linen and dedicated more than 3,000 years ago at 2 Egyptian shrines of Set, god of darkness. These hordes of fossils had been lost to science since 1924, but some of the bundles resurfaced in the Bolton Museum, Lancashire, UK, in 1999, figure 410. Inspired by this intrigue in the first fossil hunters, the museum's
Sample complete. Ready to continue?